All right. If you have a songbook, open it up to number 852. We'll sing that song in a minute. I want to welcome you. You know, Miles is away tonight, so he asked me to fill in for him. So here I am. And we'll be talking a little bit later tonight about the poor, the lesson about uh, people who, in the time then, had absolutely nothing. They had no food, no place to live, and sometimes not even clothing was enough. So we'll be talking about them a little bit later on and what our obligations are and how that developed in the church over the years, going way back to the Old Testament and then bringing it up through the New Testament and try to make it relevant to us today. I hope you picked up a midweek reminder. If you did, uh, we have some notes on there, and I'll talk about them first. And then, Brother Keith, would you lead a prayer after I finish? Larry Kennedy remains at North Alabama Specialty Hospital. I don't have an update on Larry, um, but I did go visit Don Killen. And Don is having some difficulty. He's been diagnosed with Parkinson's and had a good chat with him. He looks good. They just need to figure out what kind of treatment that he will receive. So I was glad to see him in reasonable health. Otis Ray Dickerson, we need to continue to pray for Otis Ray, and Adam's doing better. He had a little problem with his feet, but he's doing better. Wesley Tidwell will be going in for some tests, and he needs kidney dialysis, and we want to generally pray for Wesley. Edna Hunt has some serious health issues. Henry Jones is a little baby. Had some open heart surgery, so we need to pray for him. And Jim Clemens, cancer has returned, so we need to pray for that treatment. A couple of other notes. Family of Diane Hamner, Steve Green passed away, so we'll pray for that family. And Nancy Tays is in the ICU. She's another relative of a member of our church. Is there anyone else who we need to mention while we pray tonight? Okay. Brother Keith, could you lead us in prayer? Amen. Number 852, kind of an encouraging little song. So let's sing together. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair, when the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of all his wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. when the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Thank you. I want to talk tonight a little bit about something that's on my mind. I've been asked to participate in a group that's going to the Dominican Republic at the end of the summer. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but I've been asked. And I'll be teaching preachers from Haiti, which is the poorest country in this part of the world. And I was thinking what I might have to teach them about, so I began to think a lot about the poor. And when we talk about the poor in the context of the Bible, we're not talking about low income, as we might in the United States. We're talking about people who had nothing. And they didn't have a place to live, they didn't have clothing, they didn't have food. They had absolutely nothing. The Greeks had a special word for that. And that's the one when you look in the Bible and it says poor, the one that really is not poor, it's desperately poor. It's a person who has literally nothing. And we find this in the Bible and the instructions in the Bible of how to help people in the situation where they might reach what we call destitution, or a less fancy word, homelessness. When they get in that space of homelessness, how should we help them? What is our obligation as Christians, particularly for our brothers and sisters, when we need to prevent that from happening, when the bottom has fallen out and things have gone wrong? So this is the word destitution, or homeless, if you like, that Jesus used when he talked about the poor. He didn't talk about low income. He meant people who had nothing. We can see this in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. You might remember that story where Lazarus is a crippled man who's laid at the gate of a rich man, and the rich man ignores him. The rich man eats wonderful food and comes in and out daily and pretty much ignores this man who's crippled and at his gate, whose sores are licked by dogs and who's not treated well by the rich man at all. As in fact, he's despised or ignored by the rich man. Well, Lazarus is this kind of desperate poor, a man who has not enough clothing so the dogs lick him. He's out in the sun in the day with no shelter, and he doesn't have food to eat, whereas the rich man fared sumptuously. The rich man had plenty of good food. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Lazarus of this world. Now, time has changed somewhat since the Bible. We have all kinds of social safety nets for people so they don't become destitute. We have Social Security. That's a very important thing that supports people with some income. It didn't exist before the 1930s. So you can imagine, even in America of 100 years ago, there was no Social Security. If you ran out of money, you had to rely on relatives for help, or you had to rely on charity. We have subsidized housing where people can get apartments at low rent rates when otherwise they might not be able to afford a place to live and would have to live with relatives or, like the homeless, live on the streets. We have the EBT program, which used to be called food stamps, where people can get food when they can't afford food. And we have Medicaid, when people get elderly and they can't afford nursing home care. They can go on Medicaid and still get that care. So we have a lot of programs now, but at the time of Christ, there were none of these. There were none of these. So if you know someone or yourself are relying on that as one or more sources of income, it wouldn't have happened. So at the time of Christ, there were no programs. And even today, in times of crisis or uncertainty, there are times when people become destitute, when they become homeless. They're not all in Los Angeles, as the television seems to portray. You don't have to go far to find the homeless. You can find them in this community. So people without shelter, without enough food, and sometimes without clothing for the rain or the heat, or some other condition, the wind, they don't have that adequate protection. And even these programs, their existence in the future is somewhat uncertain. I don't know if you've been following that issue as Congress deals with Medicaid. Now, there are also people who fall between the cracks. These programs aren't perfect. They don't cover everyone. And I'm going to be talking about 3 cases. These are not made up. They're real people. I'll talk about first a person who is 19 years old, a person who sets out on their own, strikes out on their own in terms of trying to make a life for themselves, get a job, move away from home, and they literally strike out. They can't find a job. They run out of what money they have. Where do they go? In this case, this 19-year-old started calling churches. It was in Nashville. And he'd gone to Nashville to sell Bibles, but he found out it was about money, not really Bibles. So he quit that job and living in a hotel. The company that's selling Bibles said, you have to leave the hotel because you're spoiling our sales pitch. So where was he to go? Didn't have any friends or relatives in Nashville. He wound up just dialing churches. Just picked out a phone book and started dialing churches. One right after another, and you can name whatever group you want. He went on and dialed each one of them. I don't know if he dialed the Church of Christ or not. But finally, he found a group that said, here, we'll help you get a job. And they got him a job at a hotel downtown, and he slept in a little mission in East Nashville called the Cora Tibbs Mission. And he got by with that help from that church. So that's one example of someone who falls between the cracks, a 19-year-old who, for better or worse, tries to strike out on their own, and they strike out. They just don't land a job. They don't go home, but they have to have some help. In that case, it was a church. Another case, 60-year-old man, businessman, like the rich man a little bit. 60-year-old man decides to launch out on his own with another business. Business fails. The business he started fails. Pretty soon, he's up to his neck in debt. He's got 3 mortgages on his house. At 60, you don't qualify for Social Security. So he couldn't get Social Security. So he loses his house. He's got a car loan. He loses his car. He's got a loan on the furniture that was in his house called a chattel loan. He lost all the furniture in his house. He lost everything. Went to live in the YMCA because he could afford 1 room in the YMCA. Well, relatives helped him out and paid for that room because he couldn't pay for the room. And then later on, he found some of these programs as he got to be 62, when you can get Social Security, when you can get subsidized housing. So family helped him. So we have a church helping the 19-year-old. We have family helping the 60-year-old. Now let's take a case of a 75-year-old woman. Again, a real case. She got a call one day from what she thought were U.S. Treasury agents. And they said, ma'am, we need your help. We're trying to catch some of these scoundrels who are stealing from people, and we need to use your money as bait. We'll give you your money back, and you'll get interest on it. But if you could you write us a check for $10,000? So she wrote him a check for $10,000. And they called back. We need another amount of money because it wasn't enough. We need $50,000 this time. And don't tell anyone we've called. This is a secret operation. We're undercover. So she wrote a check for $50,000. Folks, she wrote a check for $400,000 altogether. And she lost every penny of it. Now, you and I know that's called a scam, isn't it? But don't think they aren't real, and don't think they don't affect people you know, because they affected people I know. Where did she go for help? She lost all her retirement savings, went into debt, borrowing money on her credit card so that she could buy these little gift cards, because that's what they got down to. They said, we need 10 gift cards, $50 gift cards. Where did she go? Well, ladies in her church helped her out. They became her social support system in the church because she had lost everything. Now, she did have Social Security, but she did lose every penny she had saved, for over $400,000 for her retirement. These are all real cases. They're not drawn out of the newspaper. They're drawn out of people I know. And they're people you know that are like them. Why don't we hear about them more? Why do we think of the homeless as people somewhere in California? is because people conceal these things. They don't tell you about them. But I would say every family in here has a story like that of someone in their family or close to their family who has, the bottom has fallen out. They are almost literally without a place to live, without clothing, at least more than a change of clothing, and without enough for food. What does the Bible have to say? Well, let's go first to talk a little bit about the Old Testament. It sounds depressing so far, but you know, the Bible is not just a book about problems, it's a book about solutions. It's a book about solutions. When we go to the Old Testament, you look at Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 11. It's really the first time that in the Bible it deals with this problem, and boy, it'll deal with it again and again and again. And not just in a verse. There'll be whole books in the Bible based on it. Deuteronomy 15:11 says, "The poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command thee, saying, Thou shalt open thine hand wide unto thy brother, to thy poor, and to thy needy in thy land." So to be generous to, now poor here means destitute. People who are homeless, people who have nothing, we're to open our hand wide to. We're not to run from them. We're not to suspect them of being some type of criminal, but we're to help them. Hey, we want to catch it. We don't need to be suspicious of them. We need to think about how we can help them. Now, there are three groups mentioned there. There's thy brother. We're to help our family first. If you have a family member who the bottom is about to drop or has dropped out of, you help them first. Second, you have the poor in thy land. For the Jewish landowner, this meant other Jews. The poor that were always around. The poor that were, in our case, maybe under the bridge or in the woods. In the third case, we have the poor who were not only in thy land, but the needy. Those were Gentiles or strangers who might be passing through or might be live there. But they were people outside the brotherhood, outside the Jewish brotherhood. So there's an order there that we need to learn about. We help family first. We help church members second. And then we help the needy third. Others we might not even know. So the landowners were the people in the Bible who were to help the poor. Whoever owned a parcel of land, they were to take care of whoever was on that land, whether they were passing through or permanent. So we need to think about that and think, what are our priorities? Secondly, they were to leave food for them to gather. These landowners were all farmers. And it says in Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10, "And when you reap the harvest of your fields, your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God." We know a story about this, don't we? The story of Naomi and Ruth. It's the book of Ruth. And remember, Naomi was a widow. She had 2 sons. They moved away to a strange land. They married strange women. They married women who were from that land. And then they died. The men died. So all she was left was 2 daughters-in-law. Her husband and her sons were dead. In those times, that was her family. Her husband and her sons were her family. And that, for a woman at that time, meant nothing. She was destitute. But Ruth wouldn't leave her, would she? Ruth was loyal to her. And when she went back to Israel, Naomi went back to her home, she wound up in a land of Boaz. Boaz was a landowner. And Boaz had the edge of his fields unharvested. And Ruth gleaned those fields. And Boaz got to know Ruth, eventually married her. And that's in the lineage of Jesus Christ, or Boaz and Ruth. So in that case, family helped. Now, Boaz was actually the brother of her dead husband, Naomi's dead husband. So family helped. So we have the case of Naomi and Ruth. Do we have any Naomis today who lost their husbands and their children? And that person is what we call a widow indeed in the church. And the Bible talks about it. We won't talk about it tonight, but you can look up a widow indeed in the churches to support the widows indeed. So we have a couple of stories. We have the story of Naomi and Ruth. If we were to look for a rich man who's lost everything, that's Job. Remember I talked about the rich businessman, 60 years old, who lost his businesses, his house, his cars, his furniture, any place to live. Family moved away. That's what happened to Job. He lost everything. Job was the richest man in the East. And that, again, is a whole book in the Bible is about Job. When Job lost his family, he lost his cattle, he lost, his wife. Do you remember what Job's wife told him? Curse God and die. Talk about the bottom falling out. That's Job. Again, are there Jobs today in our world where men take risks and lose everything when they take that risk? There are Jobs today. Job, remember, was helped out not by his friends, not by his family. Job had his friends visit him after he lost his farm or his life or his lands, or his health and his lands. He didn't lose his life, but his friends didn't help. They came and sat with him, which is all right, but they didn't help him get up on his feet again. Who helped Job in the end? It was God. When Job repented of kind of a self-centered view he had of his own misery, stopped blaming God for it, God turned to him and helped him regain what he had lost. So God helps the poor. Landowners help the poor. Family helps the poor when we talk about someone who has nothing. The Jews reserved charity for special occasions. They had 6 fast days a year. And on those fast days, you know what the Jews did? They gave the food that they didn't eat to the people who didn't have any food. They invited them into their homes when they didn't have any shelter. They gave them cover, something to clothing that they had. Now let's go to the New Testament. In the New Testament, we find the case of Jesus being destitute. You think Jesus was destitute? I thought he had friends who we could stay with. Yes, but he didn't have a home. Remember when he says the Son of Man has no place to lay his head? He's talking about not having a home, even though he could live in his friends' houses. Was Jesus ever hungry? You bet he was hungry. You might remember the incident on the Sabbath when all of his disciples are gleaning in the fields to get wheat. They would take wheat, pick it off the stalks, rub it between their hands to get rid of the chaff and eat what remained. And the Pharisees accused him of working on the Sabbath because they were preparing food to eat. So yes, Jesus was without food. Was he without water? Oh yes. In John 19:38, he says from the cross, I thirst. And did someone give him water? No, what did they give him? Vinegar. They gave him vinegar. You can't drink vinegar when you're thirsty. What about clothing? Didn't Jesus have adequate clothing? Well, what happened on the cross? Well, we read this in John 19:23. Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also his coat. Folks, Jesus was naked on the cross when he was crucified. For our sensibilities, we give him a cloth to cover him. He didn't have a cloth to cover him. He didn't have adequate clothing. He didn't have any clothing on the cross. He was naked. Shameful treatment. So when Paul says to us, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor. The word poor there means destitute. It means he didn't have adequate clothing. He might have had one thing to wear, but at the end he had nothing. He didn't always have food to eat. He went hungry. And he also didn't have a place to lay his head, at least some nights. So for our sakes, he became poor, that we, through his poverty, might become rich in faith. So yes, Jesus was destitute. And what does he say toward the end in the parable of the sheep and the goats? I'm going to read this to you. I'm not going to read it all, but Acts 4, if you want to look there. Excuse me. Matthew 25, verses 31 to 43, if you want to turn there for a minute. We just have a few minutes left, but this tells us where Jesus stood about this matter of helping the homeless, of helping the very poor, of helping the needy. He said, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory at the end of time, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations. And he shall separate them one from another as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Why? Now get this. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. There's shelter. Naked, and ye clothed me. There's clothing. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, say, Lord, when did we see you this way? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, believers in me, ye have done it unto me. That's how important the poor, the very poor, were to Jesus. To the extent that you help people who are desperate for food, clothing, and shelter is the extent to which you'll be received by God in heaven. And if you don't, the punishment is hell. He says that. Those were the goats. What's going to happen to them? I was a stranger, and you took me not in. I was a hungered, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in. Naked, and you clothed me not. Sick, and in prison. Then they would say, Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to thee? Then he shall answer them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it not to me. That's condemnation. He says in the end, and these shall go away to everlasting punishment, but the righteous to life eternal. Taking care of the destitute in the church and making sure people didn't fall into it was so important to Jesus that your soul and my soul rests on it today. It rests on it. It's important that we take care of those who are in need. The early church was formed to do that very thing. So on the one hand, we think of the spiritual advantage of being part of the church, but there was a physical advantage just as well and just as important. Remember the early church, they shared with each other. Why did they share with each other? It's because the out-of-town people who had come in on the day of Pentecost and were baptized needed to go home, but they didn't want to go home. They wanted to learn more about Jesus Christ. And to learn more about Jesus Christ, they had to stay there, and they ran out of money. They ran out of food. So the church members who lived in Jerusalem not just shared with them, they pooled all of their resources to take care of those out-of-towners so they wouldn't become destitute. What is Paul's mission when he goes to visit the churches in Asia? His mission, as we know, is to spread the gospel. But you know what else? He was charged to take up a collection. Galatians 2, verses 9 and 10, we learn that. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars of the church, perceived the grace that was given unto me, Paul, they gave unto me the right hand of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and they to the circumcision. Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I also was forward to do. He was to not only spread the gospel, but to bring back money to the desperate church in Jerusalem, which was being crushed between the Jews who had thrown out the Christians, wouldn't hire them, wouldn't talk to them, would disown them. And on the other hand, the Romans, who wouldn't have anything to do with the Christians either. They weren't worshiping their idols. That church became itself desperately poor. So where do we find the poor today? Well, we find them in the cracks between those programs that exist in the United States, not only in Los Angeles, not only in Nashville, but in Killen, Alabama. We find them around us because they're missing. We find them in our families. We find them in whole churches abroad. All I have to do is mention places like Ukraine, Gaza, India. We find whole churches that are poor. Now remember, the collection that we had originally was based on collecting for the poor. When Paul was sent to collect money, he wasn't sent to collect money for contributions, but our contributions have developed from that. And a good portion of our contribution goes to help people in desperate need. We have a benevolence program here that's very active in the church, very quiet in the church, but very active in the church. We also have a program of missions that's very active in helping churches abroad. And now you can see why when I think of going to teach preachers in Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, I think about what have I to say to them of any value. It's this. The church is about not just saving souls, but it's about saving lives. It's about keeping people out of destitution, keeping them with enough food, enough clothing, and enough shelter to have their needs met. Well, as I said, people keep this a secret, and I don't expect you to share with me any personal knowledge you have of this, but I know that you all have some personal knowledge of it. But you can contact me or Brother Selton or any of the elders, Brother Mike, if you think that you need some help or know someone who needs some help. Let us know. We can't help if we don't know. And secondly, be assured that the question you should ask yourself is the question I ask of myself. What am I doing for the desperately poor? What am I doing for all those poor people that Jesus not only talked about, but identified with and put our soul safety based upon it? The church was created as a safety net, a net of salvation, not just of souls, but of physical bodies, to make sure that everybody has all of their physical needs met. Well, that might not be much by way of an invitation, but do contact me if you have a need or know someone who has a need like that. Well, I think I heard the bell ring. I know if I go overtime, there are going to be not only some mad teachers, but some anxious parents. So I'll end there. But just one or two more things, and then we'll close. Let's see, I should have a sheet here. Make sure you pick up a midweek reminder before you go. It lists a number of activities, particularly Good Samaritan activities. I like that. See what's going on in our church to help others. Backpack program mentioned at the bottom. Right now it's inactive for a little while, but it'll crank up again soon. And we need to see that those needs are met. Needs out in the community. Again, needs for food in this case. They're out there, and they're in the dozens, folks. They're not just one or two people. So pay attention to that and contribute to that if you possibly can. There'll be a finger food, I can say this, I think, finger food farewell family fellowship for Thad and Morgan. It will be Sunday, July 6th at 5 p.m. Let's give them a good farewell. They've been good to us, and let's be good to them as they go. And wish them well, Godspeed on their way. Last thing, a Cedar View service will be this coming Sunday. If you can possibly go to it and support that preaching that goes on there, please do so. Finally, Brother Micah, would you lead us a closing prayer for us?
Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for all the blessings you bless us with. Through all of us, we've been sick, afflicted. And I thank you for the lesson John brought us up as to take and apply to our everyday walks of life. Dear Lord, just be with us, leave here and bring us back to the next point in time. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all. God bless.